For the first section of the Gospels, Matthew begins with a genealogical account of the ancestors of Jesus beginning at Abraham. Mark doesn't even talk about the beginning of Jesus' life. It begins with the beginning of his ministry. Luke begins with John's parents, so it's even before the beginning of Jesus' life. And John begins with an overarching theme that Jesus is God. God became flesh and came into the world and dwelt among us. So I think that to best combine the three beginnings, I'm going to skip Mark because that begins with his ministry, not the beginning of his life. I think the best combination would begin with John, the overarching theme, then begin in the chronological account, starting with the story in Luke of John's parents, the angel visiting him, up to John's birth, and then going back to Mary and Joseph and their life, and then how that intersects with John, continuing on with Jesus' ministry. Let me take a look at Matthew one more time. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Jacob fathered Judah, and from the line of Judah goes all the way down to David. David fathered Solomon. I believe in Luke, I've heard that it was actually the line of Mary, since they are a little bit different. So from David, instead of going to Solomon, it goes to Nathan, and that's where the split happens. I'm not sure about that, but because of the difference, I will include both genealogies. I don't want to leave anything out. I'll put the record in Matthew earlier, since that's the beginning of Matthew, and I'll put the record in Luke later on to keep as much information and accuracy as possible. I don't want to leave anything out. So I'm going to start with John, as I said. The version I'm reading from is the King James version, but it's the easy reader. It's not the original King James. It doesn't have these and thous. It doesn't have that Old English. The Trusted King James in an easy read format by Whitaker House. They put VER instead of KJV, they put KJVER. I really want this gospel that I'm combining to begin with Jesus, because that's what it's all about. That is who it's all about. I really want it to begin with Jesus. So John says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. And he goes into this grand scale of looking at existence and life and creation that God made. And that's why I really want to start there, because it starts from such a large point of view. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him. So is God, God's creation, created by the Word. And without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness comprehended it not. Overarching, this is God. God made creation through the Word. So getting more and more specific to the Word, Jesus. So 1 to 5 seems to be a very cohesive beginning. In him was life. The darkness comprehended it not. Good explanation for people who don't get Jesus, who just don't understand, because they're in darkness. And then I'm going to jump into another paragraph. There was a man sent from God, whose name was John. You know, I'm going to do my best to include the italics, because from what I understand, that was the translator's attempt to better convey the meaning of what was said in the original Greek or Hebrew or Aramaic, even when those words were not there, because Greek or Hebrew may have just had in this section, in this verse, John 1 verse 9, that was the true light, which lights every man that comes into the world. The words "that was," the beginning of the verse, are in italics, and I guess from my understanding is because those words were not in the original language. So I'm going to include those italics, to be honest. He was in the world. He came to his own. I love how this version capitalizes all the H's in his, because it's talking about Jesus, so it's making it clear who is being spoken of and giving added reverence, where I think the original King James doesn't do that. It just leaves it as lowercase. I like this. And the Word was made flesh, full of grace and truth. Beginning of verse 15, it goes into John bore witness of him and cried, saying, "This is he of whom I spoke." he that comes after me is preferred before me. So this is beginning an explanation of John's ministry. So that I'm going to make another paragraph. I haven't even looked at Mark yet. Let me see what's in Mark 1. The beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, as it is written in the prophets, Behold, I send my messenger before your face, which shall prepare your way before you. The voice of one crying in the wilderness, Prepare you the way of the Lord, make his paths straight. John did baptize in the wilderness, and preach the baptism of repentance for the remission of sins. The beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. That's pretty broad. As it is written in the prophets, Behold, I send my messenger. So verse 1 is about Jesus. Verse 2 is about John. So maybe I could put verse 1 way at the beginning. Yeah, I'm thinking of a place to put verse 1. The beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Maybe I could put it after the first 5 verses of John. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. The beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Or I could put 1 and 2 at the beginning of the second paragraph. That right now begins John 1 verse 6. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. I could have it, the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, as it is written in the prophets, Behold, I send my messenger before your face, which shall prepare your way before you. And then go, there was a man sent from God whose name was John. That would flow very easily. There's a clear difference between the introduction, which is verse 1 and 2, and then verse 3 in Mark chapter 1, because verse 3 goes into him being the fulfillment of the prophecy, the voice of one crying in the wilderness, and that is mentioned way later, after the birth of Jesus, or at least so far as I have it, after the birth of Jesus, after the birth of John. So that is going to be the separation. Well, maybe I could also put verse 2 way later as well, because I could put verse 1 of Mark in chapter 1 after John 1:14, because that's the whole introduction. And the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. The beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. That could be it. Yeah, that could be it. What do you think? Yeah, verse 1 has to come right at the beginning of this book, because it's saying this is the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. The whole life of Jesus is part of the gospel. The fact that he was born of a virgin, the fact that John leapt in Elizabeth's womb, that's part of the good news of Jesus. The fact that God created us is all part of the good news, but saying the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, that should come at the beginning, instead of just right before Jesus actually begins his ministry. So now I just have to find out where to put it. To put it right at the end, after verse 5 of John 1, or after verse 14 of John 1. Or maybe just the very first words, even before, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. I could say, the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. I could do that. Yeah, I think I should do that. The very first words can be the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Then go to John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. But see, beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. I don't know. I like in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. And then later on, speaking about, because when you talk about Jesus Christ, you're talking about his time on earth. You're not talking about the Word, because when you talk about the Word, you're talking about his entire existence from before the beginning of time. That's where I could put it. I could put it right at the end of verse 14. And the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. Okay, so it's going from God, Jesus existing from the beginning of time, now getting much more specific. The Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. Jesus' actual time here on earth, which is what this verse, Mark 1, is mentioning. The beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, his time on earth. And the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. We beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. And then I can go into the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Okay, I think that's what I'm going to do. Yeah, and then after that it jumps into Luke. For as many as have taken in hand to set forth the declaration of those things which were most surely believed among us, even as so it's going into, yes, this is the beginning, and I'm going to now make an account of it. Yeah, that seems like a good place to put it.